the banks of the Ohio River as it flows by the city of Madison, Indiana. It's an American folklore festival where thousands and thousands have come to enjoy themselves and just have some fun. Hello, I'm Keith Jackson, and you're about to see today on ABC's Wide World of Sports what we call the Thunderboats, the unlimited hydroplanes, the powerhouses of boat racing. Run for the Gold Cup.
I was always excited to see my dad go out, and I always wanted to see him do well. Wanted him to win.
That day in '71 was very, very stressful for me because I knew that my husband was going to go or blow.
Back then, it was true thunder, and that's what we recreated here in Madison.
I was very familiar with the story of the Miss Madison and their exploits in the 1971 hydroplane racing season, but when I met Jim McCormick in the late 80s, I guess, I was really taken by both his story and the story of Madison, this dying river town that, owned and operated its own hydroplane racing boat, and how they, were sort of the bad news bears of the hydroplane racing world.
It floats!
And although the film's about boat racing, it really isn't about that because it transcends that.
The more I learned about the town and realized that at this point in time in the town's history, they were really on the verge of, bankruptcy and just closing up shop. Many river towns in this country disappeared in the 60s and 70s as people stopped using the river as a mode of, commerce and transportation and started using the trucking lines. And so a lot of these little towns just up and disappeared. People just left town. And it created a really interesting question for the character of Jim McCormick. What do you do when your town is dying? Do you, go for the great job you can find in the bigger city, or do you stick it out and try to keep the ship afloat, so to speak? I think that question would be even more complicated when it's being asked by a 10-year-old boy. And in this case, in the father-son story, that's really what Jim McCormick was facing.
I used to come up here sometimes when I need to think about things. It's one of the special things about where we live. It just occurred to me today that you've never been here.
That was another thing that attracted me to the story, is an opportunity to show people a world that they might, not normally be familiar with.
I was not that aware of powerboat racing, and yet this little town of like 9,000 to 10,000 people was the seat of it all. And guys like Bill Muncie and the driver of Miss Budweiser and the other drivers, Jim McCormick and so forth and so on, they became summer legends in your house.
Because I'm from the state of Washington, you know about boat racing because the Seafair in Seattle is one of the biggest events in the whole Northwest.
It was actually, I think, a little more popular during the time of the film in the 60s and 70s. It's an incredibly dangerous sport. These guys who raced these boats, they were the real-time old cowboys. They didn't wear seatbelts. They kind of felt like their odds were better to roll with the punches of an accident than risk drowning if the boat, flipped over.
I remember the very day when legendary racers Chip Henauer was killed. I remember being absolutely shocked. It was like Michael Jordan just got shot or something. It was that devastating. So when this came, it immediately clicked into my childhood.
One of the first times I ever heard about the story, I had an opportunity to see the old ABC Wide World of Sports footage. And it was really moving. You see some 16 millimeter, footage from some sports show from some Saturday afternoon, 25 years ago, and you think, well, whatever. But you watch that and you see that for one day in this town's life, for one day in this man's life and in this man's son's life, this guy was a sports hero.
I remember he came in and he leaned over the cockpit like this, and he had a big grin on his face, and everybody's jumping up and down, and he got out of the cockpit, and Tony Steinhardt jumped out on the deck.
When I first saw Jim get out of the boat, tears were just streaming down his face, and all the crew were getting on board, and they were equally excited.
The most exciting part of that was the ride up from almost a mile on a police car sitting on the hood and all the people. And then when we got to the judge's stand, to have Colin Bardo, a legend in our sport and a legend musician, to present you the Gold Cup.
There's a piece of the footage, and the only footage that I was able to see of who I think that Jim McCormick might be. You see the boy looking at his dad, and what father is not be proud to be looked at as a hero, as this boy looked at his dad. So I told Bill, the director, Bill Binley, I said, that's where we need to go with this. This is where it needs to end up.
Mr. McCormick, we have your autograph.